Every topic, everywhere. This is Believe.
Hello and welcome to the Hoosier Football Tailgate right here on the Believe Network. I want to thank our sponsors, BetOnline, for their undivided support throughout the football season and now into the off season. BetOnline is off and rolling with the NFL in full stride, the NBA, college basketball. You got the college football playoffs and bowl games coming up. NHL as well. NBA, I may have said already, is your number one destinations for all sports wagering. You can get it right on your fingertips, both via the desktop and mobile access at any time, almost any sport that is played, from the MMA to international soccer. Head over to BetOnline today. Remember, use our promo code BELIEVE, BLEAV, for your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. BetOnline is where the game starts. And well, thank you again, like I said, to BetOnline and all their support on the Hoosier Football Tailgate on the Believe Network. A lot of things have happened here over the course of the last week as Curt Cignetti and his staff now is pretty much enveloped into the recruiting process that they need to be in. Not only evaluating their incoming and also working with the portal, as many athletes have, one of those things where things happen and that's just the nature of the beast. Now, Indiana had a plethora of recruits, freshmen coming in or scheduled to commit to Indiana. I think it was somewhere in the neighborhood of 20 plus at the time. And from what I understand is that Coach Cignetti has evaluated some positions as well as asked kids to maybe look like they need to move on and look for other opportunities. I hate that. I don't like it because the kid's been engaged with IU for a better part of a year. And unfortunately, that's just the nature of the beast. And, if there's not a spot there for them, you don't want to go somewhere where you may welcome over this time. And it's just one of those things where, he's got to get the right kids in there. Now, he's had several recommit where they reevaluate, offered some of the recruits that Indiana had, and they have kept. And I think that number right now is around 12. And then he's offered a couple of offers out there as well. I know on a couple of quarterbacks. Now, one of them I think is a 24, and the other one maybe like a 25, 26. But he's off the ground and running, and he's done a lot here over the last few weeks with recruiting. We're going to talk about that a little bit later and go over not only high school kids, but as well as those that are in the portal, because some big news hit today on a Hoosier that entered the portal and now has made a commitment to attend another university. We'll talk about that later. And unfortunately, we're going to lose some pretty good ball players, I'm afraid. But that's what happens when you have changeover in staff. The other big news today that happened this week, earlier in the week, the NCAA has made a proposal to the major Division I schools on redefining different levels of competition and really creating what I would call a two-tiered Division I. And what that would look like is a elite Division I, where there'd be different rules as it pertains to certain aspects that I'll outline here in a second, and a kind of status quo level that maybe the mid-majors operate in currently, because maybe they don't have the financial backing, and that's going to be something that is going to be a big part of it. Now, this is just a proposal that went out to all presidents at the Division I level, as well as the ADs, to look it over. Personally, I think this is the NCAA's way of trying to remain in the administrative state as it pertains to college athletics, that they can handle that aspect of it in a different form. Because I know several schools at the Division I, the major level, were thinking or proposing themselves to just break away from the NCAA, so they no longer were under that administrative state, so to speak, with their rules and stuff. So now the NCAA has created this proposal and basically has really redefined what that would be. And here are some of the quick caveats from all that. Of course, they would create a new subdivision within the NCAA. The highest resource schools, the ability to compensate their athletes at a different level. It gives also the proposal, the way it read, is that at this higher level, you would have to put in a trust at least $30,000 per year per athlete for at least half of the school's eligible athletes. So it wouldn't necessarily be everyone. It would be a determined amount that those individuals you would get like 30 grand. It would also bring the collectives and the name, image, and likeness to end, under that umbrella, so that Title IX would be in full force, and they would have to determine the number of athletes, but also with that being a 50-50 split, that means there would be female athletes that would also benefit from this type of rule. Now, $30,000 a year is the minimum. It could be as much as you want, as long as you're doing the Title IX aspect of things. Then it also brings the collectives and NIL under the athletic umbrella, and then they can do things there instead of on the outside. Create the rules that the member schools could determine scholarship limits, roster sizes in various sports. This one, to me, is maybe a little bit bigger than the $30,000 deal. You could essentially have an undetermined amount of scholarships for football, let's say, and you can increase the squad size from 105 up to whatever you want it to be, as long as you are making the necessary compliances with Title IX and things of that magnitude. This would be huge because essentially you could have, like I said, 130 on scholarship. Now, I know the football coaches for the better part of the last 5 or 6 years have been asking for this because the injuries that have occurred throughout the season that may ultimately deplete a position group because of certain, different rules and things that maybe they weren't able to offer, X position that 1 year and so forth, that made them behind. So the coaches have been asking this to go from 85 to, I believe, 95 or 100. So this has been in the works of discussion for a while, but this is a huge impact if this proposal would go as written. It would create a structure where schools who could do more in compensation could. In other words, it's, the Alabamas, Michigans, the top tier programs out there. If they've got the money, they can do whatever they want. If it creates an unfair advantage because they're able to pay, X, Y, and Z more, or offer, more scholarships or whatever the case may be, it does. Now, in my opinion, it creates a very big unlevel playing field, because even though you've got all these conferences, not every school within that conference ultimately is going to be able to take on what Michigan could do, or Ohio State could do, or Bama, or Georgia, Florida. I mean, so you can see where this can kind of create some unlevel playing fields based upon that alone. And that would be a concern in that regard. And this is why Indiana, schools like Indiana, would have to make a very big commitment monetarily for their football programs in order to compete at that level. Now, if they choose not to, but do remain within that Big Ten structure or whatever that may be, when they have to play teams that have more resources than they do, because they couldn't get the kids or whatever, you can see where that gap could get even wider in some respects. So a little concerned about that one as it pertains to those schools. Schools could then engage in NIL deals with their athletes. And I think that's a big one, because the schools can lock up their name, image, and likeness. And, that would, help on one end. Now, that wouldn't prevent a kid from going out to like what, the Williams kid out at USC did, where he did a couple commercials for Nissan and some of the other ones where they got paid. But at least the schools could engage in that as well, because it's under a one umbrella. This is the big part, and this is where the NCAA is trying to save themselves. The NCAA remains the governing body, except for the college football playoffs, because that would still be a separate thing that would be dealt with. But, the basketball tournaments and things like that, but they would still be the overall structure and rules enforcer for all the NCAA schools. And honestly, I think that's what most presidents would still want, is some form of that in place, so that they have something taken care of all the sports, and it's just not the wild west, so to speak. But that, the Atlantic had a good article on this as it pertains to how it worked out in terms of different aspects of it. I know that I'm just kind of hitting on a few points on this, but I think the biggest thing is, the $30K being just the bare minimum as it pertains to what they could pay athletes. So upon getting a scholarship, a full ride scholarship, now they could pay them. Now, they still would not be considered employees of the institution. So they're still figuring out, I'm not sure how that all translates into all this, but you can see right there and then how this may have a huge impact on schools like Indiana, Northwestern, Minnesota, whatever. University of Cincinnati, who's in the Big 12, and they've made the bump up. I think ultimately, I'm not sure how that would all look, but what decisions have to be made if something like this is adopted by the NCAA, and it's going to come sooner rather than later, as it pertains to the implementation on this. It would, like, for instance, Indiana's got, the Hoosier Collective and some other ones out there, that they've gotten the $3 million, and some of them have raised money over $1 million and stuff, and all that's, going to help Coach Sig in his aspect of the portal and how he does that, not only with those guys that are in it, guys that are still on the team or incoming freshmen, but $3 million is not anywhere close to what a Michigan, Alabama has to deal with. They have somewhere in the neighborhood of 15 to 20 million per year And that's where the discrepancy and the biggest gap happens. So Indiana would really have to raise it to do it that way. Now, I saw an article on the $30,000 minimum limit that they'd have to do for half of the athletes. So somewhere like 500 athletes, boys and girls, and it was going to come out to like 7.7 million that these schools would have to, put in this trust to be in just at the bare minimum with that. So for Alabama, that's a drop in the hat. Michigan, that's a drop in the hat. Indiana, how does that impact them in that regard, and other schools? And then how does that impact with money that they're going to have to get? And that's what they're going to have to commit to give the football program at IU a fighting chance to be competitive. And I know some people will argue and say, well, just drop football. I'm going to tell you right now that you don't want that, because you're not going to be in the Big Ten anymore. That's number one. Okay, you're not going to be in the Big Ten anymore. And if that's not, I don't think that's what you want, because I still think that exposure alone is better than being some lone basketball school in the, the Big East or wherever those schools compete at. I just don't think that's the answer. But who knows what they could say. But what I'm saying is, Indiana is going to have to make this decision, and they're going to have to get on board with it sooner rather than later. And I'm not saying it's going to happen overnight, but they're going to have to do this not only this year with what they have, but they're going to have to, what do they do to double that amount next year? Going from 3 to 6 or 6 to 10. In that regard, millions of dollars on top of this. The other thing that in that article that I also forgot to orchestrate was there's a cap right now on what schools can pay out to athletes in terms of cost of attendance and things of that magnitude. That would also be removed, letting the schools decide what that would ultimately be, how that ultimately would be distributed, and so forth and so on. So every kid that's on the roster in some form or fashion is probably going to get a little bit of money. Now, the better the athlete, the more the money, because you get name and image likeness, and not every, you're not going to have 105 kids making 6 figures a year. It's going to be very limited, maybe your top 22, top 30 type of kids, but they're going to have at least some bare minimums that are going to be able for those kids that are not in that position right now. They'll get something, and then they've got something to try to work for, in that regard. So I don't know if this proposal per se as is would be adopted and accepted. It's a start of conversation, but ultimately the idea behind this is so the NCAA can remain in charge of college athletics at the top level and not risk them pulling away and establishing something else, because if they do that, then this would, really hurt the NCAA overall in that respect. Now let's talk a little bit about recruiting and kind of what's been occurring and going on here of late. I know that Indiana, for the most part, has been, let me see if I can get over here to that screen. If I can, there we go. Right now, these are the kids that Indiana does have commitments from, and right now it's 12, and it's gone down some. Now, these kids have supposedly been re-offered by Coach Signetti and his staff, as well as other kids that they have added to the offer list. But these right now is who they've stayed with as it pertains to commitments overall at Indiana. And I believe it's a pretty good start for them to remain with at that regard and continue with, because I do think they can go up to about 30 scholarships this year, if I'm not mistaken. So they've got plenty of scholarships to give and to meet the needs that they fulfill, they need at Indiana this coming year. But right now, 12 is where they're at. Remember, December 20th is the first time that they can actually have a true signing date, that doesn't mean after that no one else can sign. They can sign as far up to, June for that matter. But we've drawn away from that February traditional signing date where December 20th is kind of taken over that, and then you have another one there in February. On the other flip side of this, the portal. And top off, Brendan Sorsby's the one that made a commitment today, announced on X that he was heading to the University of Cincinnati. So there's one Hoosier that's not in the picture no longer. And then you can see that Jalen Lucas just went in today, I believe, and he's got offers from Penn State and Arizona State thus far in that category. Coming down, Jordan Greer's picked up an offer from Tulsa. Bedford, Lyman, he's got an offer from Auburn. And then the big one down here, Donovan McCauley, with an NIL valuation of about $240,000. He's got multitude of offers, including Kentucky, but he's picked up a Penn State and Michigan. And unfortunately, I don't see D-Mac remaining with the Hoosiers. I do think he'll look to at the grass on the other side of the fence, so to speak, and see where he can get money-wise. And then Carter Smith, the young kid, freshman, he was a high-touted recruit. He's got an offer from Ole Miss, so there's another one that could get away. Mounds has one from Akron. Miles Jackson has, ironically, JMU, and then other school, Alabama. I think that's Alabama A&M, if I'm not mistaken. So, good source for this on 3.com, as well as pigs.com have some of this up to date and with the transfers. But I would say that, it's probably likely that Jalen Lucas, Donovan McCauley, and we already know that Sorsby is gone, and that doesn't mean other players could enter into the transfer portal. Now, kids that have already transferred, like Taven Jackson, for instance, if he went back in the portal and transferred somewhere else, he'd have to sit out a year because he's already had his one transfer. So I don't see that happening at the present time. So I look for him to be back, as is Brock Lowry has not made any decision as it pertains to the portal. And so I think there's a good sign. Now, some of these kids, I'm sure that Coach Signetti, in my opinion, is probably talking to Donovan McCauley to keep him to stay here. But when a coaching change happens, it's difficult in some respects to keep kids, especially some of your top players. And that right there would really hurt the wide receiver room for the Hoosiers next year in terms of losing some kids like that, and including Jalen Lucas, who's a dynamic player as well. So you can see it's a very fluid situation, and it's, day by day it changes. It changes with not only the high school recruits, but it also changes with the portal and how that is going to impact or not impact the Hoosiers when it comes to December 20th and on. And hopefully we can, keep some of these talented kids around, because it's hard to replace a body like Donovan McCauley. It's just difficult. And that's why you see Michigan and Penn State offering a kid like that, because of his size and length and things that he can do down the field. Those type of schools, they want that type of kid. So that's a hard one to swallow a little bit, but we'll see what all happens in that regard. Going forth, I know that the JMU quarterback, who's threw for like 3,000 plus yards this year, is also in the portal. I don't know, or have not heard, if Indiana has made any offers or overtures to him. I know that they have offered some kids that they did recruit at JMU. One of them was a quarterback that looks pretty decent. So you'll have to see what happens on that front as it pertains to signing and things of that magnitude with the portal and how that may all play out. Most of the staff, from what I'm understanding, is in place for Indiana. Now they're doing some double duty with coaching down at JMU for the bowl game. But the coordinators are all established. Brian Haynes came in, and Pat Coons, her previous IU GAs, are back in Beantown, and Bryant coming in as the defensive coordinator. He's done a great job at JMU, and I'm pretty excited to see him get his opportunity at the Power 5 since I had the pleasure of giving him his first job. So I guess you can say I have an eye for talent. But I believe that he is going to be one of those guys that is going to do well. And I know I got a comment here. Thanks for the comments from Terry Davis. It says it's already unfair. Seems like the schools are trying to get their hands on the money by becoming a middleman. Well, that may be true. And that's why I think the NCAA wants to have some guidance and directions over that as well, Terry. But, the schools want to protect themselves as much as possible because they're the ones that have benefited all the years. But now all the money that they're getting for their TV rights, those are billions of dollars that they're going to have to now kind of share out with their student athletes. All that's going to come into a fold. But I know having the collectives a part of the whole story as opposed to them being on the outside where the schools have nothing to do with and vice versa, or they couldn't have anything to do with, having them in-house, I think would be a better scenario as opposed to having it outside, but time will tell. And again, these are just proposals. A lot of things are going to change between now and ever this being adopted, but IU is really going to have to get themselves in a position so when this does become a answer to what they're going to do moving forward with the NCAA and paying kids, salaries and things of that magnitude, we'll have it ironed out by the NCAA and the member schools. And, more times than not, what is proposed is never really the final product anyway. They'll try to, get everyone's input and find out what this is going to do and how is it going to impact everyone per se. But again, it's not going to keep the Michigans and Alabamas and things of that nature from having more than, anybody. And that's always going to be the issue when it goes forward. But that's kind of the way it's been now anyway. Now it's just going to be, they're going to have the opportunity. The thing that I would worry about is the number of scholarships that schools could give because, in the days before there was an 85 scholarship limit, and I've heard Lee Corso talk about this all the time. Woody Hayes would offer a guy that IU wanted that he thought, well, he's maybe pretty good, but I don't want him to go to IU because I don't want to play for him. So they'd offer him just to take him off the streets and not let a school like IU get a chance at getting that kid. And that's what they used to do. Bear Bryant at Alabama was kind of the master of it. He would offer a multitude of kids so that he didn't have to play against them at Georgia or Auburn or wherever. So that's the thing that I think ultimately can be a little bit, a devastating blow to a school like IU. So we'll see what happens. We'll keep you abreast of everything, not only from the recruiting aspect, from the proposals that may or may not come down the pipe as we learn of them. Appreciate you joining us here this afternoon. Remember, Bet Online, the number one source for all things sports wagering. Thanks for their support of the Hoosier Football Tailgate. But for now, I'm the Coach Griffith. This has been the Hoosier Football Tailgate right here on the Believe Network.